Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Uh, I do appreciate that there might be some major change in the quality of the video because I'm using a new piece of equipment. Still don't know which one is best. I'm still experimenting, but if you like the content, please bear with me. And I'm sure I'm gonna figure this shit out soon. Alright, today's video is about nationalization of major economic sectors and whether that drives prices down as the left or the far right claim. Those who like big state. In order to understand whether prices would go down, first one should understand which are the exact components of pricing. And broadly speaking, you've got three components. Number one, you've got the labor cost. Then you've got all other costs, which can be, infrastructure, resources, overheads, shit like that. And then you've got the operating margin, the so-called profit in simpler terms. All right, let's look into the labor cost first. I don't think anyone preaching, the values of nationalization and all that shit says that essentially what we need is either to reduce the number of staff in a particular sector or that they would reduce salaries. So what they're saying is that, on the contrary, we might hire even more people in most cases. All right. So presumably that shouldn't affect. Then the next one is all other costs. Now, are you really saying that, capitalists who are, according to the left or the far right, the devil himself, greedy capitalists don't use resources responsibly, and that the state could use resources more responsibly? I really doubt that. So that's again a bit unsound in a way. And lastly, we've got the operating margin. Now, I do understand that for many people, the operating margin is something that they cannot even contemplate about. And they usually, if they ask them randomly, okay, what's the operating margin of a major, let's say, power utility or something like that, they might tell you something like, I don't know, 50%, 70%, 200%, I don't know. While in reality, the operating margin is usually very low. If we talk about the power sector, for instance, for most utilities, the average is 5%. Now, one could say that, yeah, okay, we could reduce that. However, it is important to appreciate that even public corporations still make profit. Why? Because they need to reinvest money, they need to improve infrastructure, and all that. Therefore, it's not the case that just because something is public, you essentially would have zero profit. On the contrary. Now, one could argue that, okay, if it's public, at least, money could taken away from somewhere else, and essentially you could artificially drive the prices down. That's called subsidies, okay? Number one, you don't have to have something nationalized in order to subsidize it. Subsidies can very easily go to the private sector. Many commodities and many services of the private sector are heavily subsidized, so that's completely irrelevant. At the same time, just because you subsidize something doesn't mean that it is essentially cheaper. What you do is, just essentially tweak the way of payment. So rather than paying directly, you pay indirectly through taxation. And one, of course, could argue that, yeah, okay, but then you can manage taxation and the ones who have could pay more and all that. Okay, subsidies or taxation and whether, subsidies can be beneficial or not can be a topic for another video. But for now, it turns out that in an ideal world, private or national, in a well-functioning system, shouldn't matter at all. And presumably that privatization or nationalization should have zero impact on prices. However, in our world, practically speaking, the situation is a bit different. So, in most cases, privatization leads to lower prices. Why? Because of competition and because, by and large, capitalists, corporations, tend to spend money more responsibly. The public sector has the proclivity to overspend. Why is that? Again, that can be a topic for another video. But the fact of the matter is that by and large, privatization drives prices down. Now, is this always the case? No. There are particular cases where in countries like Russia and other maybe other post-Soviet nations where privatization didn't work. Why is that? It's because privatization was carried out in a very questionable way. And, those motherfuckers who happen to take over particular utility or whatever basically had some really, maybe weird connections with the government. And essentially, they took over, but without liberalizing the actual framework, the actual market. So essentially, it was still a monopoly, no competition, and again, just governed by a few people who essentially were accountable to no one because they had very good connections with the government. Now, many people tend to say that, in order to assess whether nationalization works or not, we simply need to look at the prices and the actual effect. Okay, that's one idea, but we need to always ask the right questions. Because in order to understand whether nationalization or privatization has worked, one should think that, for example, if prices have increased for a particular commodity or a service after privatization, one shouldn't just assess whether prices have increased, but what is the fraction of, let's say, the expenses that one has to bear for a particular service or commodity over a household income. Because it might be that prices, even after adjusting for inflation, went up, but at the same time, household income went up even further. Therefore, the fraction has gone down. Because, okay, let's face it, if you go to Norway, Oslo, and you buy a burger, that's fucking expensive. If you go to Belgrade, Serbia, in Serbia it's obviously much cheaper, okay? But at the same time, an average Norwegian can afford many, many, many more burgers than an average Serb. So, again, it's important to ask the right questions. Then another thing, which many people tend not to take into account, is whether there have been some systemic changes. For example, if we talk about the private sector, the power sector again, in the United Kingdom, for instance, and in other countries as well, but let's talk about the United Kingdom. It is the case that prices have gone up. To be honest, I don't know what is the fraction over the household income, but overall prices have gone up after privatization. However, what many people neglect is that lately there has been a massive penetration of renewable energy technologies. And renewables are more expensive than fossil fuels. That shift was imposed by the government. It's not that people decided that they just want to switch to renewable energy. It is somehow imposed. Whether that's good or not, again, that can be a topic for another video. But the fact of the matter is that, for example, here those who preach the nationalization of the energy sector, they never said that they would relax those conditions and those targets with regards to decarbonization. On the contrary, they say that they would essentially try to achieve decarbonization much faster, which would increase the cost even further. So okay, so please try to think critically always and ask the right questions, and don't let either the left or the far right, those who just believe in a big state just because, fool you. Okay? That's all for now, and until next time, adios.